Well, good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here. Been looking forward to coming here for a good while. It's just a, a great honor and a pleasure to be at the feast of the Lord, which is what we will talk about a little bit here. My wife Linda and I absolutely love this site. I've been to several, and this is kind of home site for us. We were threatened, well, not by somebody with a gun or a knife, but we had a threat of not being able to come just for some health problems. And so we've been praying fervently that we'd be able to come here this year, and here we are. It's wonderful. It's like the dream. It really is a good illustration. So we're happy to be here. We are here with my sister, Janice Clyer, and several of you know her, maybe almost all. She's from Baraboo, Wisconsin. And it was mentioned earlier that this is my 75th. It's our 75th feast that we have attended. The first one was in 1951 in Big Sandy, Texas. The first Passover was in Gladewater, Texas, the previous Passover. So that's a long time, and I was thinking about it, I might get some mileage out of this, brag a little bit. I think should give us some bragging rights. So I think I'll just brag a little bit, 75 years, and brag about my parents. Janice was 2.5 and I was 5. We didn't do anything. No bragging rights for us. But our parents, Paul and Phyllis Knapp, answered the call. And they studied into it and obeyed and took action and were faithful for decades and died in the faith. So it's not so much a brag, it's just a good lick for the fifth commandment. Honor of the parents. We can't wait to see them in the resurrection and are so anxious about that. And I took that from David John Hill in 1972 at the feast in California, Squaw Valley. He said he honored his parents and something like, I don't know what it was, I can't remember, but he said I just wanted to get one good lick in for the fifth commandment. And so now I have as well on that point. But that is an amazing thing. We can't believe we're over 35, and here we are, we're over 35. Don't know where the time went. So, I am wearing a little feast flower. It's an ice cream stick that's been stained, not painted, stained, a little design. It says, Happy Feast 2023. And it's a flower cut out, a leaf actually, cut out of yellow cloth, stands up by itself. And I was given that 2 years ago by a nice little girl that came up. And so if that little girl is here, I'd sure like to see you and thank you for that this year. If that happens, I've been wearing it on this suit every time I wore this suit ever since, which isn't all that much, but kept it around because it was important. What a nice thing to receive. She got some ice cream sticks and made several little nice things for us. And she went around and handed them out. So, I'd like to start off with a story. Happened in the late 70s. The latest it could be was 81, but I think it was like 78 or 79. And we came up to Wisconsin Dells for the feast. The speakers used to meet every year at 2 o'clock. 1 o'clock was the department heads, and 2 o'clock was the speakers meeting on the day of opening night. And the idea was if you were going to speak on something or cover something twice or 3 times, the same thing, and even things out and just compare notes and so on. Now we learned our lesson and we have it, 6 weeks before the feast or so. Yeah, that's very helpful because this is illustrative of that particular problem. I was day 6, I think, and had the first one, and then the second speaker went over, and if he didn't have the same scriptures and everything, I had, a part 1 and part 2 sermon, and he just wiped out part 1. So there I was, and that's the way it was, and it wasn't any different, and, he got it. And so I said, okay, I'm thinking to myself, I've got to adjust this, and I'll have to expand that. And it came down to number 5, and he took the second half. All my scriptures and everything. So we got to number 6, which was me, and I said, well, I told them the story, and of course they laughed. So I got a big chuckle. Well, what are you going to do now? I said, well, I've forgotten who the coordinator was that particular year, but he said, well, what do you have? And I said, well, that was part 1 and part 2, and I said, I do have something on the Psalms of Degrees, 15 Psalms, 120 to 134. It's about the feast. It's a festival psalter, and I got, oh, really? Ooh, that's, the mood in the crowd changed, and they weren't laughing at me anymore. It was an improvement, And then Mr. Bob Fay was there, and he was sort of the old man of the group and the most experienced and had the highest status. And he says, Mitch, that really sounds interesting. I'd like to hear that. Why don't you, if you can, go ahead and give that. And so I figured, I was not quite a newbie, but not very experienced. And if Mr. Fay told me, well, then I'd do it. So I did, and I got rave reviews. I'd studied it for years, and so I was looking at that, and I figured it was somewhere around 47, 48 years ago, and I've checked, and it is okay for somebody to give the same sermon, within 48 years of each other. It's probably okay. I reminded everybody of that at different feast sites and here a few times. But that's what I'm going to do. But I would say, does anybody remember that famous sermon I gave? Anybody remember hearing that? Okay, I'm completely safe. My sister does. So. Thanks, Janice. Well, at any rate, I do know quite a bit more about this. It's a subject I just love. It's so powerful because the feast is so meaningful and so powerful that I'd like to share it with you. I just think it's really interesting, and I'll have to go fast because there are 15 of them. But the point is not to give a thorough study, but to give the orientation. I understand a lot more about that. When you see that, you read it yourself, and it just comes out at you. There's deep instruction about the feast. The festival psalter was included in the Psalms as a group. It was a previous festival psalter that we used in the temple and so on, and then it was included pretty much all together, putting it in right after the great Psalm of the Law, 119, and it actually fits into context after with 135, etc. But it is so absolutely meaningful. It's just full of prophecy, and it takes you through what you're supposed to be thinking as you keep a spiritual feast. It's for the first fruits. It was used at the temple and very meaningful, but this is for us. So that's why I wanted to cover this, and we better dive into it. Just wanted to tell you what it was in the first place, a separate psalter about the feast. And it's just powerful, I believe, and we'll see if you agree. Major observation, I have a lot of points. I had like 20 pages of ideas I've got to include, principles I've got to include, and that's impossible, so I tried to pick some that will really be useful and helpful for all of us. First of all, just an overall observation, the holy days, the plan of salvation, we know covers the 7 steps of God's plan. The more you study that, the more you realize how profound that is, that the holy days are placed as they are and what they mean and everything. And the festival psalter is about the Feast of Tabernacles, specifically, and the 8th day. You look closer, and it pulls in all the meanings of all the other feasts. Mr. Shaby actually wrote this in a couple of letters and did a couple of sermons last year before the feast. with that fact, was just reminding everybody that this really stands for and pictures not just the millennium, but the whole plan from start to finish. But it does it in poetry, and it doesn't do it with bullet points, feast by feast, but it covers everything. And also the lessons that we learn, the ideas are cumulative, that is, of the holy days. Each has a context, and each provides the context for the following holy day. And it also, at the same time, gives this great historical prophetic picture, or let's say plan, of the great events in history. Each one of the holy days has a constellation, as it were, of several major doctrines around. First the Passover, unleavened bread, and all the way through the eighth day, except the eighth day, because we don't really know much about that one, but the sixth up to that point. And so each one has many lessons. What would you say the context? Where did Passover, the need for Passover, come from? What's the context of the Passover? Well, it would have to be bondage in Egypt. Exodus 2, the last 3 verses, the people groaned under the cruel bondage, and God heard them. That's what's so powerful. God heard them. He promised to do that for us too. And so the idea of Passover is escaping the bondage, going to freedom, overcoming all that pain and the troubles and the pain in life. And then, so God saved them, took them out of Egypt. They had the promise of freedom and a whole new life before them. And then what? Well, they started griping about things because they didn't have direction. They had to have some direction. And it turns out that the context of the days of unleavened bread is the Passover. We were freed. And so what do you do now? Well, the way you have freedom is you live your whole life, all 7 days of unleavened bread, eating the teachings of God, the unleavened, pure, sweetened, not the soured, evil bread of sin. And that analogy only works just that time. Leavened bread is really good. They say it's better for you, so. But that's the point of that use of that analogy. And so the solution, when you're freed, is to start doing it God's way and living, following God and following His instructions throughout your life. And that's what's needed. And so the context of unleavened bread, and they go right together, is Passover. And what do you do when you have a bunch of people and they've got the laws of God and they're really striving to keep them, and you add the Holy Spirit? You get the church, so you need Pentecost. It's the holy day that pictures the church, that has the Holy Spirit in addition to the law and God's calling and leadership and guidance. And so you have the church, and that's Pentecost, and have the long summer following that, picturing the last 2,000 years of productive work of the church in small and scattered groups, sometimes only one in the whole nation, hardly any fellowship at all. And of course, a lot of times small groups, most of the time the last 2,000 years. And what do you do after you've had 2,000 years of spiritual work with God preparing people in their minds, converting them to not only believing or being convinced, but really working hard, desiring the truth and following it? What do you need after that? Well, Christ needs to come back. It's time for Him to come back and have the resurrection of saints. So there's trumpets. And that you have the resurrection and the world all wrecked and torn up and burned out and so on. And you have a bunch of people who want help. They want to be healed, and they want food and everything else, and they're willing to be humble before God and follow. And so you have to have atonement, because that's what that is. That's the next need in this great plan. And what does that give you? A whole world of people who are repentant, and they want God's truth. Well, that's when you can have the millennium. So that's the one we're keeping right now, the Feast of Tabernacles. And the 8th day is somewhat of a mystery. We're told, it's an extension, obviously, of God's rule on past the millennium. And we have a little bit of knowledge about that, and ultimately, enormous, the kingdom of God, which we know even less about. And so there you got it. Each one provides the context. It makes sense. It follows. Now, you don't have that order in these Psalms. You don't have everything laid out just like I did that. But you have all the elements of everything before, and that's included in the feast. And how do we know that? We read the Psalter, the festival Psalter, Psalm 120 to 134, and we see that's reasonably well in order, but it talks about all these things, what you need to do with your attitude to keep a spiritual feast. And so, have a little bit more than that, and we don't really need more than that. So I'd like to, let's just go to Psalm 120 and take a look and ask the questions as we start. What is the context of the feast? I'm just checking these little things, and I think they're both fresh, so I was worried about bugs, Mr. Flom sitting right behind me, and he didn't open either one of them, so thank you, sir. Just enough to wet my whistle here so I can talk. Okay, let's go to Psalm 120. And here's the great Feast of Tabernacles, peace and prosperity and glorious good stuff. And he says, in my distress, I cried unto the Lord, and he heard me. That's the context of the feast. He goes on, he said, man, I'm surrounded by liars, deceitful tongue. What shall be given unto you? False tongue, sharp arrows of the mighty, and woe is me, I sojourn in Meshech, that I dwell in the tents of Kedar. And these were, Meshech moved north, of course, that's the word for Moscow. But at that time, Kedar and the other nations close by, tribes, were the enemies, and he had to dwell, he's talking about dwelling among people who were, I'm just in enemy territory. And what do you say? When I speak peace, they are for war. What do you do when you look around and the whole world is crumbling around you, and you would think, like Elijah, nobody knows the truth, and I'm having a hard time just keeping everything together and honoring God and being in harmony enough to stay with society and contribute and so on. What do? You say, man, I'm in enemy territory, and I need to get out of here. And that's the context of the feast. The feast is to be the the taste. Psalm 34, to taste the Spirit. And Paul mentions it also. Taste the true way. I need a break. And we've already heard, about taking a break and being interrupted and all those things. Very, very important points. And that's the first item on the agenda, your context for the feast. I need a break. I need to break out of here and get it, get to a place where everybody's nice. Can you imagine, I was thinking of this earlier, can you imagine a world where everybody said, well, what can I do to help? I'd be glad to help, if you need anything. I have said that more, say it less now because I'm the one that's hobbling around and needs extra help. But I thought, how nice it is. I walked in, and here's Mr. Phelps. He said, well, what can I do to help you? I said, well, you're so busy. He said, no, I'll help, And then I was, I've had several people say that. I thought, how nice. Went to one feast in Utah, I guess, a few years ago. And we were there looking around and feeling lost. It was real close to the beginning of opening services, and this young feller, a family friend from a long ways, he jumps in and says, Mr. and Mrs. Knapp, how can I help you? Would you like a seat? I got right. And we said, whew, thanks. Yes, we would. And thanks a lot. Can you imagine a whole world like that? Your neighbors in it? Well, yeah, you can. You've been keeping the feast. That's what happens at the feast. We have had a little taste of what it's going to be like in the world tomorrow. One small example. Everybody's thinking the same way. Everybody wants to help. Not just would help if you asked them, but they like to. How good, how wonderful. That's what we need. And so the context is, I'd sure like a break from this world. I'm in enemy territory. I don't fit in here spiritually. Okay, then we go to the very next point, 121. I will lift up my eyes to the hills, so that I need a break here. Now what am I going to do? Oh, that's right. Immediately reminded. I'm going to look to God. I look to the hills. Jerusalem was the tallest of the hills from the seacoast. You'd look up to the hills and then find the tallest, presumably, and you're going to look to God. That's where the temple was. That's where he lived, dwelt. My help comes from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. This is an interesting psalm because he says, verse 3, he will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He who keeps thee, he's our keeper. He will not slumber. You can't, if you got him on coffee break, and you missed out on a blessing or help when you needed it, well, that'd be bad news, but our keeper doesn't sleep. And then behold, he who keeps Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. It's not just you, but it's the whole nation, and bring it forward, the whole church. The Lord is thy keeper, verse 5. A shade at thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee, nor moon. Verse 7, then he says, the Lord shall preserve thee from all evil, preserve thy soul, and shall preserve thy coming in and going out from this forever. He won't stop once God starts that job. He doesn't say, okay, your time's up. 20 years is enough with you already. I'm moving on and find somebody better. God doesn't let us go. And by the way, the word keeps, the word for keep, and for preserve, they're the same word. They're just different nuances of the same word. God is our keeper, our preserver, the lifter up of our head, Psalm 3, the one that just takes care of us, and he never sleeps. How comforting is that? And so we look to God. That's how we're going to make this change. That's what we're going to do when we are able to escape the world. We're going to look to God. There are some physical things that you can draw analogies to, and that is just getting to the feast. That was meaningful to my wife and I this year, and one other to Utah a couple of years ago. We made it, and I never thought of that when I was a youngster, like a 60-year-old youngster. My, I didn't worry about that. Just get up and go. And there's a lot more to it. And you really begin to understand, have compassion towards other oldsters beside yourself, and understand just more deeply how God looks at us, and just understand in general, just more wisdom. It is a great thing that God has created this way. So the keeper and the preserver is a guard. The word has to do with guarding. God will simply guard us. He will guard you and me. And like Job, he'll put a hedge about you. If you have a trial, the wolf didn't slip in when Christ wasn't looking or taking a coffee break, It's because he allowed that, because it's going to be better for you. You need that trial. That's so comforting when, it really is a trial. And you wonder why. You don't know why necessarily. A lot of times the trial doesn't have anything to do with directly what you're supposed to learn. You're learning faith, and all kinds of things can happen. A lot of times God he does say time and chance happens in absolutely everybody's life. So, We have come to the end of that. So the first thing is build on faith and just looking to God. If you're going to have a spiritual feast, you're going to have to see the need for one, and not just an opportunity to get off and take time off and goof off. The rest and relaxation and fun is great, but there needs to be more. You need to see the reason why we need to change, and the idea of the feast including, or every holy day, including the last one. Unleavened bread includes Passover. Pentecost includes unleavened Passover. Otherwise, there's no reason for it. Trumpets includes Pentecost and unleavened bread and Passover. It's all the way, I'm almost done, but that's the way the whole thing is. Otherwise, there's no reason for the next one. And so we need to see the personal need and in general, sometimes even physical needs, but just the spiritual need for keeping the feast. Some people have said, well, why keep second tithe? You can take your last 2 paychecks and make it to the feast and back and do okay. And they did. But they didn't keep the feast. They've got one little detail. You don't need that much money to keep the feast yourself. That money is for you and taking the widows and others who can't come and helping out others with either financial problems or whatever. It's to share with everybody. We got here and had an excellent, wonderful, lovely dinner meal, evening meal, had dinner, and weren't asked. Well, I knew in advance that he was going to pay for it because he always pulls out the wallet and very generous. And so I thanked the hostess, his wife, and thanked him because I knew you lose those kind of arguments. But what's that? Motivation to, oh, good, we can salt some more away and keep it. No, that gives the opportunity to give more to others and share and look for somebody to help. And of course, money generally helps if you're away from home and so on. But that might not be the help that's needed. It might be companionship and transportation, various other things. Not to go off on to those things so much, but God will help you to keep a spiritual feast and give you whatever trials you need to learn. You just will not just guard, but manage your life. So these are the first 2 things. Recognize the need for it, and secondly, just look to God for everything. Teach me, so that's the atonement attitude that we're supposed to keep on through everywhere. Not just being sorry for past sins, but Passover and atonement, but living a life of seeking for God's direction and His guidance and His correction. It's part of the feast. Look for correction. How should I change my plan here? What can I do different? What do I need to, see something that needs to be done, or even better yet, understand that gives me a whole new vision of what I need to be doing and how I need to be thinking. So that's the first 2, and we can't take that much time on all of them, but we don't need to. Number 3 in the Old Psalter is chapter 122, Psalm 122. And this starts out, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go up to the house of the Lord. It's feast fever, we call it. And it actually is real. It does exist. I sort of scoffed at that for a long time. Well, we always go up there. I was a kid, And then I realized I was getting excited. I was just trying to deny it. I don't know, hard-headed. I'm not sure why. But it's true. You start thinking, because the feast becomes something in your mind. It's not just a plan. It's not just that you've been there before, but it is this big thing in your mind, a dream, if you please, but it's its own entity and becomes that way, and it needs to be because it symbolizes so many things for us. So let us go to the feast. The feast is supposed to be a spiritual experience, and it is, and you know that because that's what it creates. There's this big thing. It's the feast. It's special, as we've had pointed out. And that first sermon we needed badly. Whew, we made it. This particular year we needed that. And the dream sequence and all those things. I presume that most everybody really was touched by that one. And I already thanked the speaker, Mr. Phelps, coordinator. And if I could have gotten to the others, I would have also. Hopefully I will be. Our feet shall stand within thy gates, O Jerusalem. Now, and then it looks like a whopper, an untrue statement. Look at this. It says, Jerusalem is builded as a city that is compact together. Look that up, what it means. It's not just squunched. It's everything flows right throughout the city. Everything's convenient. It works. A city that works. And you look at Jerusalem today, it's I've heard it's the most conquered city in all the world, well over 100, I think it was 120 or 140 times documented. It's been rebuilt on top of the rubble of the last, city. I don't know the exact number, but it's supposed to be number one in the world for being conquered and turned to rubble. Why? Well, Satan hates what God loves. And God chose Jerusalem. And he said, I will yet again choose Jerusalem. And it has much more meaning than that, which we'll come to in a moment. But I was really excited when they said, let's go to the feast. Our feet shall stand within thy gates. It's built as a city that is compacted together. Everything just works together, and it's smooth. So this isn't the present city it's talking about. This is a city to come that's going to be built as it should be, a city that works, that makes sense, and so on. Where the tribes go up, the tribes of the Lord unto the testimony of Israel. Testimony, first definition is testimony of God is the Ten Commandments, but then there are all the other words that proceed forth from the mouth of God. But to give thanks unto the name of the Lord, and then we come leaving that question for later. What does he mean, Jerusalem being well built and convenient? So we'll come back to that. For there are set thrones. A familiar theme. There is authority in keeping the feast. If we didn't have authority in planning, and the planners work hard. If you notice the festival coordinator and department heads, they're running around here and doing a lot, which we appreciate greatly, very much. But if we didn't have any authority or any planning or central organization, what would we have? Well, we wouldn't have a feast. We'd have a big mess. We had people who get here. I knew this one church I went to, I was visiting way out in the hinterlands, and I was kind of a guest, and they weren't sure that they wanted to join United. This was early on. And so we had half of the church arrived about 45 minutes late. If they were early, they were 30 minutes late. And there was no respect, no organization, no discipline. It was a higgledy-piggledy group. And so we don't want a higgledy-piggledy. It wouldn't even be a feast. It says there are thrones of judgment. The thrones of the house of David. So it has to do with God's inspiration, his governing and governance, where righteousness would proceed from. Then it says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. They shall prosper who love you. Okay, the key here is Jerusalem is, in this context, that's the church. Pray for the peace of the church. Here's what it doesn't say. If you get a wild hair of an idea for a new doctrine, don't go start your own new church and decide, well, every church has to have a pastor general, and these 5 people definitely need a pastor general. And, well, it looks like me. What do you know? How convenient. The people that do that have generally wanted to do that for a long time, and angled for position and honor. And when you serve in the ministry, or anywhere in the church when you serve, but specifically the ministry, because there's honor that comes, which don't deserve it, but you appreciate being appreciated, and just return the thanks to God. I don't deserve this, but it's an honor to serve when people honor you. Well, that feels good. But it wears thin. If you serve for a long time, it's not enough to be honored. Oh, well, he's the boss, Pretty soon you need real friends and substance to your life. You don't want we all want to be honored, and we all should be honored by each other. But Satan's idea of climbing the ladder, getting to the top, is against the Holy Spirit. It's a whole different thing to want to serve and to walk in and everybody says, "Can I help you?" And you realize, well, I'm saying that too. I'm trying to help. That's a whole different way. It's a different world, a different spirit, different. Okay, then he says, pray for the peace of Jerusalem, or just did say, I read that. They that prosper, they shall prosper who love you. If you love the church and you love unity, if you have to swallow hard, and I have a few times, probably everybody has, and think, well, I just don't like it. Like Gilbert O'Sullivan's, now I can't think of the name of that play, but it was funny. He had a bunch of pirates, and this one pirate it was comedy, obviously. This one pirate was saying, I just don't like it. Well, that's kind of like most of us sometimes. Okay, so deal with it quietly with God. You can always go over the head of the boss, the visible boss, and go to the top and talk to the top. Not Proverbs. 1 Peter 1:23 or else 2:23 says, Christ, when he was reviled, didn't curse back. He didn't threaten when he was hurting, because people hurt him. But he left it to the Father, who makes just judgments and just takes care of everything in the end. And I can't remember whether it's chapter 2 or 1, but you can ask Mrs. Artis Rosby's that, because she knows. Because we were talking about that one time, and I never put that together. That was great. I learned something. I happened to remember that day. By the way, Mrs. Rowensby's, who lives in Lake Geneva, thanks for holding our spot. Appreciate that so much, and everything else too. Now I have to concentrate and go back to where I was. But I actually did want to thank you for that. But there are times when you're going to have to do what Peter said. He sure had to. Sometimes you swallow hard or you just live with it. And she actually, Mrs. Ronsby told me that with a situation she had. Ask her. It's really a great story. And don't bombard her, but she'll probably be glad to tell you. It was just building faith. And it just slapped me upside the head. I hadn't thought of that aspect in that way. And it really helped. We need to fellowship a lot and talk about the really important things. Anyway, verse 7, we better hurry. I better hurry. Peace be within thy walls and prosperity within thy palaces. You do something with the idea of what's going to make the church peaceful, what's going to help everybody, lift everybody up, not kind of upset them so that you can, do something. For my brethren and my companions' sakes, I'll now say, peace be within you, because of the house of the Lord. And that's, of course, the church of God. Jerusalem refers to the church of God. It signifies the church of God here. And the house of the Lord was in Jerusalem. That's the true church of God. So you can read this, and it jumps out of you and tells you what you need to think. And it makes so much sense when you read through it. Now, I will try to hurry a little bit. So 120 to 122, just starting, but they're extremely important. They're like the foundation for how you start keeping a spiritual feast. 123, unto thee will I lift up mine eyes, O thou who dwellest in the heavens. Behold, as the eyes of servants look unto the hand of their masters, and the eyes of a maiden looks unto the hand of her mistress, so our eyes wait upon the Lord our God, until he has mercy on us. Here is a person, a church, who is so set in the desire to serve Christ and obey his commandments. But like John said, 1 John, what chapter? 3. He says, he does what we ask him because we obey his commandments and do things that please him. We're not just checking off boxes. Oh, I got that commandment covered for today. And no, we're looking around. How can I help God? How can I help build the church and the relationships in the church? And then in that way, be building the church of God. That's really true. Building relationships within the church. You are building the church of God. That's the work of God. The very work of God. And so the idea of the lady in waiting, the maiden waiting on the queen, she's always going to be looking at the queen. First the eyes and face, and then the movements, but even the hand. If you look, we say so much through our hands. You know, we gesture, well, I am right now. I'm not sure what I just said, but there it is, trying to say something. But we can hardly keep our hands still. And it even gets worse in Italy, I understand, Have you ever noticed that? A lot of Italians, they hands all over the place, and that varies by culture. But this maiden is so attuned to what the queen wants. It's her job. It's her responsibility before God. And so she's even noticing little movements of the hand. That's the way we should be with Jesus Christ in studying what he thought, how he does things, and so on. So this 123 is also, excuse me, is extremely important. I just noticed I forgot something in 122. It said, for there are set thrones of judgment, the thrones of the house of David. This is talking, yes, about keeping a feast, but this is talking about the church in the kingdom. And it just so happens that you are going to be one of those set thrones of judgment. That's going to be your job, to be an authority, a leader. And of course, being humbled throughout this life, you're going to be careful to judge righteous judgment with great care for those under you. But that's talking about you and I, talking about me. Okay, got the wrong word there. Okay, so Psalm 123, somebody with humility, zeal, diligence, waiting on Christ, a life of service, waiting on Christ, and that could be helping somebody else across the street or a jillion other things of service. Okay, Psalm 124 then. This is number 5. If it had not been the Lord who is on our side, now may Israel say, have you ever felt, if it hadn't been for God, I'd have never made it. Not just to the feast, but in general. If it hadn't been God, for God and his help, then you just thank God. Thank you, Father, because I would have been swallowed up, I think. And you read Psalm 124, and he repeats it. If not been the Lord who was on our side when men rose up against us, then they had swallowed us up alive when their wrath was kindled. We have enemies. Most of them are spiritual and unseen, and we deal in a hostile land in that sense. We have to be aware that this isn't God's world. We have God's blessing and his protection. So, verse 8, our help is in the name of the Lord who made heaven and earth, but we're just looking to him constantly, thanking him for the constant help and direction in our individual lives. We live lives of acknowledging God and the work that God does for us. We're supposed to work for God. When you think about it, there's God's work, and we're going to be the big things we think about the world over. But how about all the work that God does for you and for me personally? Answers a lot of prayers, for one thing. But what you find out, you go through a trial and prayers are answered and you're finally through it. And then later, You look back and you realize God was there all the time. He had set things up. He blocked that from happening. He caused that blessing to happen, and He's brought me to this state. You've been there all the time. So that's the attitude that the church has. You've been there all the time. You just are there all the time. Thank you, Father. We just wouldn't have even made it to this point. There's an important attitude to think about in life in general, but in getting to the feast, there's a physical analogy there too. But that's what we're supposed to, that we have our minds on God if we're going to keep a spiritual feast. And if you haven't noticed, the feast just represents some microcosm of regular life, just life all the time. And so it's a help in that way, in several ways. It's a help in that way for sure. Excuse me. I'm just thankful that it didn't start before that. Sometimes I have that problem all through, so I'll try not. I'll try not to do that as much as possible. Okay, Psalm 125, never turn back. The theme is trust and security. There's a reference to atonement. It's a sad, sad thing, but you notice verse 5. Well, verse 4, do good, O Lord, unto those who are good and those who are upright in their hearts. It says, as of such as turn aside from their crooked ways, the Lord shall lead them forth with the workers of iniquity. That's a danger. It's possible to turn aside. We have to be diligent. But he says, peace shall be on Israel. Israel means those who conquer with Jesus Christ, those who conquer with the Lord. 126 brings in trumpets. That is the feast of. Talks about the captivity of Zion. And here's one of the references. We're like those who are in a dream. Now, this it seems to be a reference actually back to the context of the exile and coming back from the exile. They had dreamed of going to Jerusalem, and they set their foot in Jerusalem. And you read in Nehemiah and Ezra, I think it's Ezra, where they were just like a dream. They had actually made it, and they were standing in Jerusalem. And so the writer of the psalm is referring back to that and forward to the Feast of Trumpets and the dream that we have, the first fruits at the time of the resurrection. Then was our mouth filled with laughter, our tongue with singing, and then said they among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. So they said about the Jews who came back to Jerusalem. And that's certainly, that's sure going to happen in spades when Christ comes back to earth. Here's a little twist on it. It's not the same point, but an additional point. Verse 5, they that sow in tears shall reap in joy. Do you ever feel like that you're sowing your life in tears? There are times in our lives when things like seem like they're getting out of hand. But we're going to have those trials in life. We're going to have trials at the feast. I started learning that one early. I'll tell you a little story. I think I'll finish this first. They that sow in tears shall reap in joy. This is doing the work of God. You might have trouble, and we will have trouble, just living God's way in this world, in this society. We've had really cushy lives. This time in America, things have been very liberal and anything goes, and therefore we escaped a lot of the scrutiny that the church had in the 40s and through the 50s into the 60s, and that changed a great deal, and we've just had it really cushy. But the prophecies say we'll have trouble, and we better prepare for it, and part of the feast is keep this in mind, this wonderful blessing. All the physical thing is so nice. It's extra. We're not used to having this much stuff, this much money to spend on food and feast gifts and whatever. But the life of ease won't last. The feast wasn't made just to be perfectly comfortable. You get this many people together, and there's going to be inconvenience. And we're so rich, we have these hotel rooms. It was a little bit different when we were keeping the feast at Big Sandy in tents. And so I think the lesson would have been easier to understand then than here, that there are trials at the feast. We have it mighty easy here. But we still, no matter what tears you have, he that goes forth and weeps bearing precious seed, that he's doing the work and has trouble in his life, and that's everybody. Well, if tribulation shall doubtless come again home with rejoicing, bringing his sheaves with him. In other words, come back with the harvest, bringing bringing in the sheaves. Have that old spiritual about bringing in the sheaves. In other words, great success. And so we keep that in mind. There's the Feast of Trumpets, God coming back, the first resurrection, and just solving an awful lot of problems by the resurrection. But it's going to be worth it. That's the idea. We will have trouble in this life. In one of my little first lessons, when I was 9 years old at Big Sandy, had gotten permission. It was always a treat to go down to the spring. So you had to go through the camping ground, which was full of cockleburs and goats' heads. You did not go barefooted, I'll tell you. But if you had shoes, you were okay. So I was happy I was supposed to get a jug of water from the spring. I was glad to get the assignment. So I was running like crazy and cutting across campgrounds. There were no roads. It was kind of primitive when we first started out there. And a lot of good memories, though. 9 years old, and I'm running like crazy through a space. There weren't any tents there. I didn't run through anybody's tent, but there was somebody, and didn't have a laundromat. Everybody washed what clothes they had to and hung them up, usually on nice, white, seeable cord. But somebody ran out of cord and had a clothesline made out of baling wire, and all the clothes were gone. So I was running like crazy, and God just protected me. I ran straight into it, right in my mouth. All I knew was running along happy, and then I was looking, just immediately, I was just looking straight up, laying on my back. And I looked around, and I didn't know what happened, and got up, and my mouth hurt, Both sides were, I had hit that wire between my teeth, right in there. And I think that was protection. But I remember being bummed out and walking on, and I didn't want to feel like running, and I walked on the spring and came back. And interesting, I thought, why does something always bad have to happen at the feast? This is clear as I can remember it to this day. Why does something always bad happens to me at the feast? It's supposed to be fun. Well, God teaches us in little ways. I was just starting to learn that we're supposed to have trials at the feast. That's part of it. It represents everyday life, a concentrated, just a highly intensified training session on how to live life spiritually. So I was starting to learn that. Thought you might be interested in. I'll tell you another story about the cushiness of life and maybe missing a few. I think a little bit harder to learn the lesson. My wife, my brother was 5 months old, and did I say my wife? I meant my mother. She was the wife and mother of the family kingdom, which was very little. It was a tent, and Dad hated camping. He only did it because he had to, and he didn't buy a very nice tent because he didn't like camping anyway, etc. And my mom went in there to change the diaper, and so she picked up the top diaper, and there sat a scorpion. What do you think about that? Well, I don't know what you think about it, but I know what she thought about it. Dad knew what she thought about it. Everything in the whole tent went outside, and everything was just cleaned thoroughly. Then we took things back in, and my mom wasn't having it any other way. That's what happened. That was the law. So if you have to live with that, and the ladies had to go wash diapers somewhere. They found there was some water available, and they go down by the, I don't even know what it was, but they're washing diapers there. It wasn't quite as cushy as the life we have here today. And I'm glad we can hear examples like that and learn the lessons and not have to go through that. Any ladies agree? Any young mothers agree with me? I bet they do. I bet I have a lot of agreement there. Okay, just a couple of interesting stories. So, verse 5 is sad in that peace will be upon Israel, but there will be some, and you learn there'll be some that leave the truth. And it's a sad thing, and it hurts, and you miss people, but God must give the right to do wrong. Otherwise, we do not have the choice to do right. It's not a choice. If you couldn't do wrong, you just have to do right. And that's not what trains us to think like God, to always choose right, because the right is our will, not just God's will. So that's why so many of the trials, and so we understand that. Okay, 126 is another one concerning, or that brings up trumpets. No, I just did that. Sorry, that was 126. I'm going to have to go back and review my numbers. Counting, important. The point there is, you win in the end, bringing in the sheaves, that is, coming home with the produce of living a life like that. Numbers 8 and 9, 127 and 28 are both about family blessings. Basic law is that it's the example of, that, as we said, God's way works. If you do it God's way, then you will have the results. And so I won't spend much time, don't need to spend much time on that. 129, prayer for help in persecution. Anybody who is going to follow Jesus Christ will have some persecution, will suffer persecution. And so that's one of the big lessons we need to learn. Sometimes we have learned that at the feast, or at least opposition, but sometimes persecution. But again, we've lived in a lifetime here, 4 or 5 generations after World War II, when we've had a cushy life in America. And our brethren overseas don't necessarily have that. So this is a very important thing. We need to be we need to be prepared for opposition, persecution, and that's part of life, and it's part of the feast. Some feasts. Sometimes weather has been a real trial. So it's just the lesson. Very important lesson, but we'll move on to 130 and 131. These are visitation back to the themes of previous holy days. Passover and then atonement. Atonement is Passover redux, as it were. Passover is private, your own personal private repentance. Atonement, the devil is removed and the whole world is able to have access to God. So, but they have to do with repentance and forgiveness and success with that element. And it comes down to 131, just talks about such a childlike trust and humility. So with atonement, Passover and atonement, you just keep on repenting every day. You keep on, and that means changing. The best word as a synonym for repenting means changing directions. And so we just keep on asking for that guidance. What am I doing wrong? I heard of this man who every day asked his wife, how can I be a better husband? And I would have done that if I had thought of it. I didn't ask nearly as much as every day, but how about that? I thought, what an outstanding example. Anyway, so here's the attitude of atonement and a Passover, just continuing on through the feast. We're supposed to have that attitude. Now, 132 is interesting, I think. They're all interesting. But it's the whole plan. You look at chapter 132, which we won't read the whole thing. But remember David and all of his afflictions, and it's about the covenant with David. And he talks about bringing the ark back and determining to do that as service to God, and worshiping God at his footstool, referring to the ark. That is the Ark of the Covenant. And then he says, and starts talking about the church. The whole thing is about the church, actually. Verse 9, let the priest be clothed with righteousness, and let thy saints shout for joy. Well, this is the first fruits. We're not priests, we're not kings yet, but we're in training for both of those. And we need to be putting on righteousness. So we have that continual theme all through the Bible. For thy servant's sake, David's sake, turn not away from the face of thine anointed. Interesting, and each one of Jesus Christ is anointed specifically, but we're anointed as it were, and not as it were, we are. Just we have the hands laid on our head at baptism, and that puts us in a special category of just having access to God continually. And that's what the whole thing is, anyway. Verse 13, I want to go to 11, I think. Interesting, verse 12, if thy children will keep my covenant and my testimony, and that was David's children, there would be somebody on the throne, but they didn't. And so that throne was overthrown and transferred, and we know all that story. But now to sit on the throne of David, and that throne of David transfers to Christ when he comes back. And so to be there and have authority with Jesus Christ, that's the church. The one who is always with Jesus Christ. That's Zion, the church. So this is my rest forever, he says. For the Lord has chosen, verse 13, Zion. That's the church. And we think of the mountain, we think of the city, and even the temple. And you go down to Revelation 21 and 22, and you look, and the walls, says they're the apostles. And all the jewels, they're just solid jewels, no mud and brick in those walls. They're solid jewels. You look, now, what jewels does God have? Malachi 3, God's jewels are the people he has called, the people he has worked with, the people that pray to him every day, and the ones that are going to shine like the stars. The jewels, I just thought of jewelry for a long time, beautiful gems and jewelry, royal collections and so on. But in the Bible, there's even a stronger meaning attached to that, and they're the jewels that shine light, not just reflect light, but they will shine, Daniel 12 says, shine like the stars, so that God will give us rivers of living water, so we'll be sources of water and life and light, that we can give light to others as well. So this is also a reference to the church. And when he says, I want Zion, it's not just the building, which will disappear, and he's going to build a spiritual building. The spiritual building is the church. So God has said, I want them. I want that group of people. This is my rest forever. What? To live with my family. It's not a building. It's with us. For I have desired that building, my family. I will abundantly bless. He comes on down about clothing of the priests with salvation. The saints shall shout aloud with joy. And he will have kept his promise to David, that through David, and that's transferred to Christ, all of the first fruits will be saved. And then everybody else that wants to. We know the meaning of the eighth day. So now, that pretty much summarizes how it brings all these lessons in. And I would just ask you to read them. I just barely covered the general idea, but we still have 2 to go. But that's sort of a conclusion. But notice in chapter 133, and we sing about this, a hymn about this, behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. And this lovely, beautiful thing says the dew of Hermon, talks about the anointing of Aaron. The dew of Hermon is like God's blessing, his rain of blessing down on his church now and forever. It starts with the unity. That's what makes the church. You don't have unity, you just must have that to have the church. So it gets down to the reason for the church in the first place, the reason for the holy days, the reason for the whole plan. And that's unity, right? Almost. Question is, why do you need unity? It's certainly true. It's absolutely necessary. But there's one more psalm here which goes beyond having unity in the church, which is absolutely necessary. And it's at the end, after the whole story is retold in chapter 132, Psalm 132. 134, very short. It says, "Behold, bless you the Lord, all you servants of the Lord, who by night stand in the house of the Lord." Well, now who would that be? Would that be you or me? Standing in the house of the Lord at night. "Lift up your hands in the sanctuary and bless the Lord." Well, if you're in the church, that's what we do. We sing to the Lord. "The Lord who made heaven and earth, bless thee out of Zion." This is a blessing that the priests, all the priests and all the Levites, as I understand, and this changed through the years, and obedience was spotty, but the meaning of it is they stood at not the temple, but the grounds of the temple, sometimes the city, and they gave every single family that walked out of there going home a blessing, a special blessing for the coming year. And I believe I've heard that in every closing prayer on the last great day, or the eighth day, the great day, one man said. I think I've heard that every single year. That's what the ministry does, is to bless the people. That's what we do in sermons and sermonettes and so on and everything else. That's what the choir does. That's what we do when we sing praises to God. We bless everybody. And we are supposed to. We do that part of God's work as well. So, some general observations. I have 5 pages of them, but there's time for just a little bit. I wrote a long list of just benefits of the feast, and it was too long to be a sermon of itself. But just this special, and this has been covered, so I don't have to, but it's a special training time that is concentrated. It gives you more than you would ever have, just travel. But think of the promise that Christ said, you get whatever you sacrifice, you get 100-fold in this life. Coming to the feast enhances that specific promise just enormously. That's one of the things that the feast does. It's just a concentrated, I put it this way, God gives more juice on the holy days and the feast especially. He just gives more of his Spirit. So, if I can find here, I want to mention a couple of things. Skipping the feast, just lessons I've noticed over the years, skipping the feast is dangerous. Used to every feast, because so many didn't have a local church to go to, they that was a major theme. Be sure to come back to the feast. So many would fall away. If they missed one, it was easier to do, and they just go away. Skipping the feast is dangerous. If you can attend at all, do so. The next to the last point, I want to go back to 122. I said we go back to that. It says, Jerusalem is builded as a city that is compact together, which is not true today. It doesn't work or make sense. But what these psalms do is they bring in other psalms, whole psalms and sections that give you much more detail, many more details than are included in these basically short psalms of the Psalms of Degrees. And I'm looking for 45 through 38. 45 through 48, 65 through 68. There are several other sections that just add on to, and the references are there in the Psalms of Degrees, and it brings it in. Here's an example on this, and it's an instruction here today that we can use, and that is, it's talking about the city. Here's one that talks about the city of the great king. We sing about that. Mount Zion stands most beautiful. God is known for her in her palaces as a refuge. We go there. And here's an instruction in verse 12 of chapter 48. Walk about Zion and go round about her. Number the towers thereof. Mark you well her bulwarks or defenses. Consider her palaces that you may tell it to generations following. What does that mean here? That means walk around and look at the pillars. I would say talk to the pillars. I know several ladies and several men in here, and they're pillars and strong. And I know people who have been through trials, and they're part of the defenses. And we have built within us here part of the wall. So this says go around and get to know everybody, fellowship with everybody, and get to know how strong they are. See their strengths. Ignore the weaknesses. You don't need to worry about that. It comes out anyway. You know? But look for the strengths in each other. Goes back to washing each other's feet, you know. You think of somebody, you think of the positive things, wash them off a little bit, like a friend. You don't think of the negative things. So that's one really big lesson that we skipped over and came back to. Last question, does God need you? Does God need you? Pardon me. And the answer is yes. He doesn't need anybody. He doesn't have needs. But he has a sovereign will, a plan. It includes you and me. And he needs us. He's got positions for us that he's got to fill. One for each of us. He has a plan for each of our lives. And yes, we have been invited. We're supposed to be here. The feast and keeping the feast for us is part of God's work. It's really a big, important part. It takes so much energy, everything, and it's such a big part of our life. So the feast is just one of the biggest things we do all year, and that's because it's one of the biggest, most important things that we think and do all year. So that's it. I gave you a lot more than I did 48 years ago or whatever it was. But and what's more, only one person remembered it anyway. So the feast is a major institution. It's so important. It's vital that we keep it. God has given it to us. What do you think God's feast gift is to us? The feast. It gives us all the other stuff. It's been lovely, and I will let you go just barely before finishing time.